Chapter 87. As Milam was left in the care of Guy Crimson, the others took up their designated positions to ensure that nothing would interfere with their tasks. Rimuru, who was not observing Milam and Guy's fight, returned to the site of the initial rampage. As the battle between Milam and Guy continued, Guy was strategically pushing her further west to minimize the damage to nearby civilizations and settlements. "Looks like it has already awakened," Rimuru said, standing amidst the ruins of the former magic kingdom of the elves. He could not sense the baby dragon in the immediate vicinity where it was supposed to be. Suddenly, Rimuru noticed a group of elves approaching. "Hey, Clayman is there," he remarked, amused by the twisted turn of fate. He decided to wait and observe their arrival. But then, "Jahil," Rimuru muttered, his expression darkening. He suspected someone was manipulating the elves, especially given how free-spirited elves like Sarian and Sylvia traveled the world. Though he had heard from Luminos that Sylvia was currently pregnant, Rimuru began walking toward them, noting that Jahil seemed to be orchestrating something dire for the elves. Kogali was in a state of constant despair. Her once loving father had turned into a madman, someone she could no longer recognize. He no longer valued his people, ignored his responsibilities, and showed no care for her. Even when she pleaded with him, pointing out his cruelty towards the kingdom and its people, he refused to listen. When she discovered the kidnapping of the dragon princess, she attempted a small revolt with her trusted elves. Unfortunately, this led to the deaths of thousands, both directly and indirectly involved. In her father's wrath, she was also subjected to a cruel fate, yet she survived. Kogali awoke groggily, noticing the dark, moldy walls of her cell. She felt an odd sensation in her limbs and a stinging pain in her skin. Looking down at a small puddle on the floor, she saw her reflection in the water and was horrified by the deformity of her face. She cried desperately that night, realizing the full extent of her suffering and the cost of her return to life in such a grotesque form. Her father had left her locked up, telling her, "Be grateful I am even letting you live after this, Kazarim." He never returned to visit. "It's Kogali," she spoke weakly. Everything changed when she learned that Milam's abduction plan had succeeded. Less than half an hour after hearing the news, the ground shook, and the walls began to crack. In an instant, her cell was partially vaporized by a burst of light and energy. Kogali stumbled out of her cell, squinting at the sunlight she had not seen in days. I was underground, she wondered, puzzled by the presence of sunlight. As she looked around, tears began streaming down her face. Her home, her kingdom, her people, all lay in ruins. The once grand structures, which had rivaled the architecture of the dwarves, were now rubble. The joyful smiles of the elven citizens had been replaced by the screams of those who had barely survived and witnessed the horrors. She held her head with both hands as her legs gave out. From a distance, she could hear loud thumps and crashes. Turning her head, she saw Milam in the midst of her rampage, wreaking havoc on the landscape with powerful magic. She stood up and strode directly toward the source of the destruction. She wished to end it all. It was too much even for an elven princess like her. So much had happened in just a few days for her to process properly. As she got closer, she felt heavy as draconic magicules flooded the air around Milam. When she finally got near enough to be affected by the destruction, a crimson-haired demon arrived and pushed the dragon princess away from the ruins. Kogali bit her lip. She had already given up on her life, yet she couldn't even die on her terms. She gritted her teeth and steeled herself. There must be a reason why she was still alive. Turning to look at the rubble and corpses of elves, she activated the magic her father had used on her. In a twisted way, he had taught her the process of how she became what she was to further bring her to despair. Birthday. A necromancy magic that her father had used on her and her allies before to revive her, it was also the thing that had given her a deformed appearance. As the magic activated, the bodies of the surrounding dead began to turn to dust and disappear into the air. The dust began to swirl and coalesce into 3 silhouettes. As they started to take form, she pondered what she wanted for her children. Should they be strong, smart, or fast? As the magic finished, 3 bodies of varying appearances stood before her. Her grim expression turned tearful as she saw their normal faces. "He did it on purpose," she murmured, holding her face, her body quivering in place. The small girl from the trio approached her and took her hand in a reassuring manner. She reminded Kogali of a maid friend from the castle. The large man with green hair looked like a soldier she had known. And the last one, who was looking at her with a concerned expression, resembled an advisor from the king's court. "My, My children, she collapsed to the floor, sitting on the dusty ground as she hugged the magenta-haired young girl. She placed her hand on the girl's hair and held her close to her chest, crying silently, something that had become all too frequent for her. As she sobbed, the other two drew close, trying to offer comfort as well. They remained like that for minutes. Nobody could tell how long it had been, and frankly, Kagali could hardly care. They were there for her, they were people she cared about, and they were all her children. They then began to walk out of the ruins of the castle, searching for other survivors. The young girl ran and jumped around swiftly. The larger man helped move boulders blocking their path and those on top of the surviving elves. The leaner one observed the surroundings, directing the others on what to do and where to go. Kagali smiled as she watched the three of them work together and start to gather a large number of survivors. She began to wear a mask she found in the destroyed houses. Her first interaction with the grateful survivors was not sweet or touching but painful, as she saw their expressions of fear and pity toward her appearance. Well, Kazarim, you seem to have survived. She froze in place. The voice was different, the appearance was different, but she knew, whether by instinct or otherwise, that she could not afford to care. You seem to have gathered a suitable number of new test subjects. Good work. Jahil, no longer using his old form from when he was still working under Rimuru, snapped his fingers. Mechanized insect-like beings began to appear, flying above them, more than hundreds in number. Kagali could tell they were far more dangerous than they appeared. Cover them, she ordered. Her children, though somewhat reluctant, followed her orders and stood in front of the elves. Oh, you dare disobey me, son? Jahil smirked, her body shook in fear as the swarm of those insect monsters began to get closer and closer to them, encircling them awaiting for their master's orders to massacre the poor souls. Kneel down, his words laced with pure arrogance as he looked down on Kagali. If you obediently follow me, I might forgive your insubordination, Kazarim. He then began to change form to a more reptilian one, with snakes sporting from his shoulder. Kagali was in a dilemma. She didn't want to do as he says, but the safety of those behind her was also important. The surviving elves of this hell deserve so much better than dying here. Though if we do come with him, it would be worse than hell. Steeling herself, she took a deep breath and glanced at her children. Keep them safe, I'll handle them. She began to chant and activate her magic. As a royal of the Elven Kingdom, she was taught magic when she was barely a child and she could be seen as a level of a wizard right now. Jahil looked at her and he began to laugh. Ha ha ha, like a madman he continued to laugh in a way that was surreal and horrifying to witness. You think you can beat me? Beat them, he gestures to the ones encircling them now. Try it if you. As he was about to finish his words, a large roar and a high concentration of miasma breath came and obliterated his forces flying in the sky. In an instant, the army he was so proud of was gone just like that. Everyone froze, not just Kagali and the elves. Jahil as well chose to remain still, hoping the thing all of them thought would not come here. A loud deafening roar then flew down directly behind Jahil. It was a large dragon that was close to 100 meters in length. Tisk, the damn lizard is here. He jumped backwards as he turns to face it. As he moved into action, the dragon clamped its large mouth deep into Jahil's body, then throwing him far away into the sky. As it did, it spread its large wings that covered the sunlight for Kagali and the others. With a strong gust of wind, it flew into the sky and chased after Jahil, who it sent flying roaring as it went away. The elves fell into the ground breathing deeply while some even passed out from what they had just experienced. It is good that nothing happened. Kagali took a sigh of relief as she turns to the others but froze in place as she saw them. The elves, who now number more in the hundreds, were different from earlier. Their race have changed due to being faced directly by the Chaos Dragon's heavy miasma-like aura. Their skin was darker, and their race changing into dark elves. Even the elves that they found right now have also changed into dark elves. It doesn't matter right now, it's not like it has any negative effects. Let's escape this place. With her words, they all began to fled the area, heading east, where it was the opposite of where the dragon and Milam went. Rimuru, who was observing everything, finally stood up and watched Jahil trying to escape the Chaos Dragon. He watched from a safe distance as he had a small curve on his lips, seeing Jahil curse and fly away from the breath of his enemy. It should be a good way to stall the Chaos Dragon. Jahil hovered above the battlefield, panting heavily as he glanced down at the Chaos Dragon. The beast roared, its crimson eyes glowing with relentless fury. The dragon's wings beat furiously, creating a gale that pushed Jahil off balance. Its miasma breath streamed in thick, poisonous clouds that filled the air with a toxic haze. Jahil scowled and activated his device, summoning a swarm of large mechanized insects known as critters. They emerged with a whirring sound, their metal bodies reflecting the sun's harsh light. "Distract it," Jahil shouted as he sent them toward the dragon. The critters charged, their pincers snapping and energy weapons firing. The dragon roared in frustration, its massive claws swiping at the critters. It unleashed a burst of miasma breath, enveloping the swarm in a thick, poisonous fog. The critters fought valiantly but were quickly overwhelmed. Explosions of metal and sparks erupted as they were torn apart or melted by the dragon's attack. Jahil seized the opportunity to cast a fire spell, directing a stream of intense flames at the dragon's side. The dragon flinched, its scales sizzling from the heat, but it quickly countered with another blast of miasma breath, pushing Jahil back with a wave of noxious fumes. The dragon's eyes locked onto Jahil again, its fury undiminished. Jahil gritted his teeth, maneuvering around the dragon's sweeping claws and furious snaps of its jaws. The beast's breath attacks became more frequent and concentrated, each one driving Jahil further away. He flew erratically, trying to stay ahead of the dragon's relentless assault. Jahil summoned another batch of critters, though he knew they were disposable. They surged forward, their pincers and energy bursts providing brief distractions. The dragon swatted them aside with contemptuous swipes, its focus remaining fixed on Jahil. The critters' sacrifices bought Jahil a few precious moments, but he was quickly running out of options. The dragon let out a mighty roar and unleashed an enormous blast of miasma breath, filling the sky with a swirling cloud of poison. Jahil had no choice but to dive and roll through the noxious cloud, narrowly escaping the full brunt of the attack. He felt the miasma brush against him, leaving a stinging sensation on his skin. With the dragon closing in, Jahil's options dwindled. He cast one final, desperate fire spell, sending a massive wave of flames toward the dragon. The dragon roared in pain and anger, but the flames did little to slow its advance. Jahil realized he had to make a hasty retreat. As the dragon prepared another blast of miasma, Jahil pulled back, dodging the attack with a swift maneuver. He saw a narrow opening in the chaos and seized it, darting towards a nearby ridge. With one last burst of speed, Jahil flew over the edge, disappeared on the eyes of the dragon. Hiding his presence as best he could, he waited silently as the chaos dragon left. "Fuck, that was close." Jahil reverted back to his normal form as he sat on the ground, Unq quipping his weapon. "Can't believe that lizard actually forced me to escape. Yeah, you were pretty pathetic out there." Jahil. He froze in place recalling the origin of such a voice, and the heavy focus on his name made it even more ominous. Quote. Boss. To be continued.